Yo, what's up, bro? Today we have a special video, 10-hour long video for the chapters of Rise from Manhwa. Just a quick thank you to all the Giga Chats who subscribed to 25 months out to the best video ever, and now we're at almost 60k bro. Subscribe now to become today and enjoy in the video. This marvelous story starts with our protagonist, Aram. Aram is a guy that used to be a brilliant cook, a cook that won many awards and whose name was known all over the world. But all that came to an end after he got into a car accident where he lost his sense of taste and smell, which destroyed his culinary abilities and brought him to the brink of desperation. The doctor told him that his smell might come back quickly, but it's already been a year and his taste still feels as bland as ever. One day, our protagonist gets a package from the postman, and in it is a VR game system that he thought he'd just try to make his life a little bit less miserable. This game promises to engage all of his senses, and even though he doesn't really believe that it'll make him smell, he still doesn't want to lose hope. He finds it ironic as a year ago he couldn't imagine himself playing video games like this, as he thought he'd be too busy with his work his entire life. But life is strange and unpredictable in that way, so Aram decides to put the VR system on and start the experience. The game opens with some warning and then with the name of the game, which is Real. He then gets sent to the character design stage where he wakes up naked and without any physical features, where he's supposed to design his character before starting the game. So he decides to just press the button for random, which automatically designs him a character. He also puts the nickname Rice as his game name, and at that moment he's sent to the starting area where a character, Lady Uria, welcomes him, the new traveler, to the game's world. He notices that he can smell things, so our protagonist, now in a state of bliss, drops on his knees and starts eating grass with the tears streaming down his face, saying that he can finally taste and how wonderful this nasty grass tastes. The other characters present there look at him all worried out as Aram is munching on that grass, and they are wondering if he's okay. Then all of a sudden a huge dangerous chicken jumps at our protagonist, and before she reaches him, she gets smacked down by the pink-haired character with the bat, which then goes on to tell him that this is a hunting spot and he recommends him to be careful, and even leaves him the items dropped from the chicken, which are horned eggs. Not knowing what to do with them, Aram just makes himself some fried eggs, and as he tries it with his basic item provided, spork, the taste really comes back and it's magnificent. He thinks that they taste much better than they ever tasted before. It's like trying to eat food for the first time. He even gets some game points by eating these eggs, and he knows it's just a game, but he really wants to take his time and enjoy it to the fullest. And as he was busy savoring his food, the other people around him were busy catching chicken. Then a lady called Mary shows up with an egg and tells our protagonist that she saw him enjoying his food so much that she decided to trade with him. The trade would be for him to make her fried eggs for a reward. Aram then gets a notification asking him if he wants to accept the deal. After settling on the price, we see our protagonist cooking the eggs and then giving it to Mary. He's looking at her with anticipation, as even though this is just a game, she is still his first customer. He notices that he feels exactly as he would in real life. He really cares about what his customers will say about the food. Mary tastes the eggs and makes a facial expression that means either terrible or absolutely great, which makes our protagonist really anxious. But then she finally says that it's tastier than the food in real life, and this makes Aram relieved and really hopeful, as he thinks that there's a possibility for him realizing his dreams. And as he could not achieve his dreams in real life, maybe the next best thing is if he could make his dreams come true in the game world. And now our protagonist logs off the game only to open his eyes to the depressing reality of his life. Bros, who here knows about this feeling of playing the awesome games entire day, and then you finish, you log out, and before going to sleep, you are hit hard with the depression of life? Been there, done that. Anyways, back to the story. After all, that was just a game and he has to make a living in the real world somehow. So he then gets ready and goes for a part-time job interview. Our protagonist looks all different now, all clean shaven and tidy, with a spark of life and excitement about him. I guess even though he's depressed and doesn't take care of himself, he's gotta show up as a presentable individual at an interview. Anyways, the owner, without even checking Aram's resume, asks him a few questions and then agrees to hire him for the job. The reason why our protagonist is more optimistic about life and is starting to become more hopeful is because of that game, and we already see him back in the game cooking the leftover chicken meat, which he deems similar to the real life chicken. He thinks that the game wasn't advertised honestly, as it's actually even more real than the real world and yet feels like an illusion. Aram is fascinated with this world so much that he keeps trying out everything he comes across, usually herbs that he picks off from the ground. Like, this one is really bitter, maybe he shouldn't have tried it in the first place. Anyways, this time he decides to make something a bit more complex, like chicken skewers, and as he makes them, the smell attracts other players around that find his behavior odd, so they start thinking that he's an NPC chef. A lot of players show up wanting to buy his food, and he decides to start selling his food to them. And interestingly, his food seems to give some in-game benefits too, and as he continues making it for more and more people, he starts feeling like his cooking experience and skills are starting to come back to him. And then he gets a notification telling him that an achievement has been unlocked due to him hitting monsters 1000 times. And now Aram gets some new skill points, with the first one being a passive skill that allows him to see weak points of his opponents, and the other one being an offensive skill where he can focus all of his strength at the tip of his weapon, and in that way increasing his critical hit chance. He then thinks that it would be a good idea to try these skills out, as he can't just cook the meat that he picks up, he should also catch some of it himself. The thing is that he never hunted, so he doesn't have the slightest idea of how to do it. He sees some guys fighting the monstrous chicken and asks them if he can join. They misunderstand him, thinking that he wants to join their clan, and tell him that if he can hunt one of these chickens successfully by himself, they'll let him join then. Then we see this chicken Russian staring at our protagonist, and him confidently standing there and using his newly acquired skill to find a weakness in the chicken. But instead, Aram just gets sent flying by the chicken, making him realize that this is more difficult than he actually thought it would be. This makes other guys burst into laughter, telling him that he's just a newbie. Another thing he realized is the fact that he feels pain almost the same way he feels in real life. But then he remembers all the painful experiences and hard work he put into becoming a chef, and so he gets a burst of motivation. So he picks up one of those chicken horns and goes for another try. But right at that time, the monster boss, the great one-horned chicken, shows up, and the two other guys he talked to start fighting with it with very little success, as the chicken is persistent and too strong for their level. Being all inspired by his own cooking journey memories, our protagonist doesn't give up on his charge and finds a weak spot on this ginormous chicken, stabbing it with that horn in the butt. This just provokes the giant chicken more, and she becomes even more ferocious with the attacks. As the fight went on for some time, one of the guys loses his focus for a second and gets eliminated from the game. And as the monster chicken then started attacking the other guys, whose HP was also very low, our protagonist picks up Chicken's horn again and goes for another attempt at the boss chicken, but this time using his focus tip skill, and then he slams the chicken from behind, literally going through it. And this time it worked. He actually manages to defeat the massive chicken with just that one strike. After defeating it, he gets another achievement unlocked and a reward that grants him a damage increase for a certain time. People around seeing this cheer for him, and at that moment a lady with pink braided hair, calling herself Melina, approaches Aram full of excitement and grabs him by his hands. She says that she's a huge fan as she saw reviews for his food, and she wants him to become her business partner in a catering business. We now see our protagonist together with Melina and one of the guys who survived the battle against the boss chicken named Seeking. It seems that our protagonist rejected Melina's offer, but she decided to stick with him in case she can help him and gain his trust enough so that he might change his mind on it. Melina sees that our protagonist is really mindful about the food he's making, as he gobbles down some random plants that he picked up along the way and is now making facial expressions similar to those being exorcised from the devil. She really admires the sacrifices our protagonist takes to ensure that only the best ingredients get a chance to become part of his cooking. She also asks him about his nickname being Rice, and he tells her that it's basically because he likes cooking. And this is also when they learn that this is our protagonist's first name. Rice then takes some time experimenting with the ingredients he's got, and he finally makes a delicious looking dish that also smells irresistibly. He made giant chicken steak with mushroom sauce, and upon first taste, Melina and Seekin have this dreamlike experience of being chased by cooked pieces of flying chicken meat and mushrooms on top of them. At one point it gets really intense as this otherworldly experience that our protagonist's food made available makes them realize that they've never eaten better chicken in their entire lives. And after making their lives that much better with just one dish, as a reward, Rice gets a new passive related to cooking, and this officially makes him a chef in this game world. Now, as the night approaches, Melina and Seekin thank our protagonist and say their byes, also telling him that he can head towards the town as he'll be able to trade there. They also ask to get their friend requests approved so that they can stay in touch. After they left, Rice has a moment to himself, looking in the sky and thinking how ironic it is to start his cooking life all over again. Our protagonist then disconnects from the game and sees that it's already close to 4 AM. He didn't even realize how time flew in that game, and later today he's got his first day at work. So he thinks that he should get at least 5 hours of sleep and naturally decides to sleep right after he checks more info on this game on the net. So yeah, he can go to bed at exactly 4 AM, it'll be fine, right? As he was researching, he finds out that it's forbidden to put the videos of this game online, and the users who do it get permabanned. So he then instead goes to his saved videos and finds one when he fought that massive chicken, but he gets a bit disappointed as he wanted to see a video of himself cooking, but the system only leaves highlights. Meanwhile in the game, we see a guy trying out Aram's technique or poking the chicken in the butt, but it doesn't work, so he's sent flying with others laughing at him. We also see Melina passionately selling the chicken skewers and other foods, but from the customers' reactions, we see that she's not the best cook as a lot of her food is undercooked or overcooked, but she's not willing to give up yet, and we see that she wants to catch up with our protagonist. As she continues passionately calling people to buy her food, she receives a skill, megaphone, that increases the volume of her voice so that she can become louder. She's really proud and excited about it as not many people have skills in this game, so she then starts yelling at the top of her lungs, inviting people to buy her food, making people irritated with her loud voice then. Even some birds are experiencing her voice as a torture and start twitching in pain. And back in the real world, we see our protagonist doing really well with onions, cutting them really skillfully so that it makes the cook annoyed with him. The cook doesn't seem to like our protagonist and then tells Aram to make a dish called bibimbap, which our protagonist makes. And this is, I don't know if this dish exists in real life, I don't even want to Google it. So back to the story, as the food gets served to the customers start expressing their satisfaction with it, asking if the chef may have changed or something. Some of them say that that's the best bibimbap they've ever tried. Both the manager and the servers are really taken aback with this, and Aram is really happy hearing this as he now at least knows that he can rely on his technique even if he can't taste the food. He then also recalls all of the happy customers in the game that were satisfied with his cooking, which also boosts his morale that maybe his dream can still be fulfilled. But the chef seems even more annoyed with this now. As his first day on his part-time work is over, he's ready to leave the place and go back home. The boss gives him praise, telling him that he did pretty well, and even the service lady Mireille approaches him all excited and asks if she can call him Oppa. She also compliments him for staying calm and collected and doing a great job. After our protagonist leaves the restaurant, the manager asks the chef about Aram, and the chef, not liking our protagonist, mentions some redundant mistakes, looking for anything negative about him. And later that day, the manager notices the difference with customers when when Aram was there helping them with food and other things, and without him. Customers went really quiet since Aram left them, meaning that it was something he made that made people passionately express their liking for it. We also learn from some customers that the server, Lady Mireille, wears some really expensive bracelet, and so they are confused why a mere waitress would wear a bracelet of such a luxury. And now back at home, we see our protagonist cooking for himself after a long time. He's trying to make the same foods he made in the game, and he makes them, but the taste is still as bland as before, and even though he got himself full, it feels like he just ate a bunch of chewing gum. But he's not as depressed as before, as he knows that there is that game, and in that game he can finally taste food. So he decides to go and play the game again. He lies on the bed and puts on the VR headset, and just in moments time he already shows up in the game's world. He then thinks of what next he should try cooking here, and as he was thinking about it, a bunch of aggressive lizards approach him, which makes Aram decide what food he'll make. So he then engages in a fight with them, with some onlookers that recognize him for his epic achievement of defeating that huge chicken boss, wondering what he's doing as the lizards are not really that valuable, but they are just competitive and are looking for anything that they can compare themselves to. Aram actually has a really good reason for catching lizards instead of spiders, which they would be hunting for, which is for the simple fact that he didn't want to eat the spiders, and that's it really. He's just thinking that if the fight drags on with the lizards being this aggressive, their meat won't be that good, so he then thinks of mincing them. After defeating the lizards, they drop some purple magic stones that boost his defense, and as he was eating those magic stones, he unlocks a new achievement now that says, "Is that person a comrade?" And as he was pondering over what that means, a huge weird looking spider shows up and tells him not to be too surprised, but our protagonist can't help but to be surprised as you don't see these giant spiders approach you and tell you not to be surprised. It's a very weird experience. The spider then introduces itself as a queen of the first and asks our protagonist if he can help her with something. It turns out that for this achievement to be unlocked, he had to kill 100 rake lizards and not kill any forest baby spiders. As the queen spider went on talking, our protagonist thought that maybe if he just stays still, it'll go away. But the spider staring at him asks him if he'll be just standing there or will he answer her question. One of those competitive onlookers gets really intrigued by this situation as he never heard of spiders like this appearing in front of a player. It is kind of rare sight as all of the quests are hidden and they only appear once the player fulfills certain conditions. So that curious onlooker approaches even closer, checking the spider out. And just when our protagonist noticed him and greeted him, the onlooker gets eliminated by a quick stab from the annoyed queen spider. And as the user gets eliminated, he drops boots that the user made himself from the lizards and spiders that increase his agility. Aram is fascinated by them and then just happily decides to put them on despite some of the onlookers thinking that he wouldn't, as he got a bit of reputation of being a good person. But nah, our protagonist can't just leave those boots there. He'll give it back when he sees that user again probably, right? But all this gets interrupted with Spider Queen again asking him if he's an ally to what Aram finally answers with yes. The Queen Spider then tells our protagonist about the history of the spider's beef with the lizards, telling him that he'll have to kill the lizard princess if he's truly an ally to the spiders. And then he gets a notification telling him that the hidden quest, the Red Spider Queen, is now active. Aram then says bye-bye to the Queen Spider and goes on to make himself something to eat as he becomes pretty hungry. He'll use the lizard's code to make something he remembers from Vietnam, and as he was cooking, he gets another achievement telling him that as long as he cooks food beyond delicious rating, his passive ability of cooking better will increase, and for each food he makes, it gives him an increase in different abilities and skills, and as he gives it a try, he's even shocked by how good it tastes. He successfully managed to replicate the food he once tried in Vietnam. It's beyond words, and we can see how it makes him feel by his weird face. Seeing how fast his abilities are growing going after eating his food, he figures he needs to eat more, but for that he'll have to hunt more of those lizard creatures. So he then gets ready and goes to the forest in order to complete his queen spider quest. He encounters many lizards and he has a great battle with them, defeating them one by one as he gets more used to it. He becomes really good at hunting now. Meanwhile, there's a blonde lady watching him through a portal and praising his achievements. And our protagonist has a weird feeling that someone is observing him but can't quite figure out what it is as he continues looking through his ingredients. As our protagonist was finished with fighting against rake lizards and defeating loads of them, he's now sitting in for a rest, making himself some lizard meat. And then we see one of those smaller spiders approaching him and dropping a ball of web as a gift of friendship towards Aram. Aram just takes it and continues eating, and a bunch of notifications start popping up with a bunch of different achievements and boosts that our protagonist unlocked. And as Aram was busy with his own thing, the guy from earlier that died to that spider queen walks in upon our protagonist. Aram recognizes him and wants to actually give him back his boots, but the guy, whose name is Aether, tells him that once he put them on, the ownership transferred automatically, so he can't return them anymore. Basically like binds on equip. Aether is bummed out and is leaving, but our protagonist stops him, telling him that he's got some materials which he can compensate for taking his boots. He shows him the materials and Aether recognizes the web ball that he says is one of the best quality webs that can be found. As our protagonist has no clue about the difference between different items, Aether calls him a noob but still decides to take the ball and even help Aram make some stuff, as his main skill is manufacturing, and our protagonist won't be able to complete his next assignment without proper gear. So then we see Aether being really focused and working really hard on sewing some new gear, and as Aram was observing him being this dedicated, it inspired him to do some cooking. So they were both side by side doing their own stuff with the zeal of madmen, Aether making gear and our protagonist making food. After some time working on it, they both finish and Aether shows off new items that he made. He made boots for both himself and our protagonist, which are better than the previous one due to better materials that Aram gave him. The new boots increase a lot of the character's abilities, and he also made a present for Aram. He gave Aram a net that can stun an enemy for 10 seconds, which Aram thinks will be great for his princess lizard hunt. And after he gave him all the things he made, Aether leaves the game saying that he needs to go to bed now and that he already added Aram to his friend list so that they can meet sometime again. Our protagonist feels a bit bad because he doesn't feel he did anything for him, but hopes he can do it next time. Now we see Aram heading towards the lizard princess lair, where he'll have to fight it and her underlings in order to complete the quest. And his current ability is pretty good for lizards as he eliminated a lot of them. Our protagonist seems to have some issues with the two other lizards that guard the lizard princess that is just lying there and doing nothing. Our protagonist thinks the two of these lizard guards are worse than the great big chicken that he faced before. It seems that they can predict his attacks and they do send our protagonist flying several times, causing him some damage to his HP. He starts losing motivation as even with the great big chicken he had some help, but then all of a sudden he just starts thinking of them like ingredients and gets a boost of motivation. He then takes those magic stones that some of the lizards he defeated dropped and eats them. Those stones boost some of his stats and he feels a bit stronger now, so he charges for another attack where his weak point ability seems stronger than before and he manages to hit both of them, and then the princess lizard reacts to this with an ugly screech. Aram is not as hopeful in dealing with the princess when he had so much trouble with her soldiers. So the princess then gets up, finally engaging in a battle, and it's much bigger than the other lizards with fiery lines decorating her hard skin. She then lets a powerful screech out, which has an effect on the defeated lizards that they harden and revive, leaping at our protagonist for an attack. back. Apparently this is the second level lizards, and they can reach this with the princess around. And after a bit of fighting and our protagonist barely surviving her powerful attacks, the princess moltens herself and goes into the second level, while our protagonist's HP is at the very end. He's a few strikes away from being defeated, and as the princess charges at him, Aram remembers that he's got that net that can immobilize an opponent for 10 seconds and throws that at her in the last moment, catching the princess in it, but she still manages to slip through a blow of her own and sends our protagonist flying back, decreasing Aram's HP to just one strike away from being eliminated. And with the HP that low, he loses his hopes for a bit, but then decides to send one last Hail Mary attempt and attacks the lizard head on before the net's effect expires, and he loses his last chance at defeating the lizard princess. And it paid off, as the final attempt succeeded and he defeated the lizard princess. And then he started getting all kinds of achievements unlocked. He even got the lizard's ability to be able to climb up any wall up to 20 meters, which seems awesome, bros. I love these abilities in video games. He basically becomes Spider-Man. Now we also find out that he had an audience of some passerbys that saw him achieve this immensely difficult feat. And as he was thinking what to do with the lizard princess's corpse, the Spider Queen shows up telling our protagonist that he did really well and that helped spiders live peacefully. The people hiding behind trees watching Aram got really shocked when they saw the Spider Queen, thinking that he'll have to fight her next. Our protagonist, however, had a different worry. He realized that now there won't be that many lizards for people to catch, and that is unfortunate. Queen Spider told him not to worry, as they will come back, as this is a never-ending battle. Then the Queen grants him the reward for clearing this quest, and all his stats go up by 10, and he almost gets a skill called Poisoned Pockets, which enables him to shoot poison from his hands that can paralyze his opponents for several seconds and make them feel sick. I have this ability as well. When people look at my face, they feel sick. So I'm familiar with these types of abilities. Now, he also gets another achievement unlocked, occupation called Pioneer. And as he was thinking what that might be, he was already surrounded with other players congratulating him for completing this big quest. Aram then decides to have a bit of a barbecue party and sell them his food half a price as to commemorate his success. And a bit later, we see Aram cooking hard for people and people really enjoying his food. He kinda became famous with his food. Melina then shows up telling him that she found him using the game's Find a Friend function. He's a bit surprised with how many useful functions this game has, and Melina tells him that he'll be able to use them once he gets used to the system. She then tells him that she's still interested in doing business with him, as now she's got a new skill that can be of use for our protagonist. She demonstrates her loud voice skill by shouting instructions to some people fighting for who's first in the line. The voice is so loud that they can't help but to obey her and properly stand in line. If it was a little bit louder, all of the eardrums would have popped out, and you don't want to mess with that. So anyways, as the food was running out, Aram thanks Melina for her help and offers her last lizard steak. And as she was about to take it, a blonde guy shows up all of a sudden and asks for the steak for himself. Melissa, seeing that this guy won't give up from asking, just sticks the steak in her mouth, disregarding that it literally was just taken off the fire. She's just that determined on not giving that last steak to anybody. So then our protagonist offers the blonde guy some chicken skewers that were left, and this is where we learn that this blonde guy is not a random person but a rival chef to Aram, and he just wants to see what the fuss is all about. He's not convinced that our protagonist's food is that good, and that's why he came all the way here to try it out, just to prove his suspicion right. But just after tasting it, he quickly learns that he was wrong, as this is the best chicken skewers he ever tried. It sends him to the heavens as he gets smacked by the deliciousness of the skewers. He's resisting the urge to praise it, as he doesn't really want to acknowledge our protagonist's cooking skills, but he can't help, so he screams out, "Crazy taste!" Now we learn that the blonde chef guy is actually the rude chef in real life in the restaurant where our protagonist works part-time, and now he's just contemplating over him, meeting rice, and trying out his delicious food. Ironically, as he's thinking about him, he keeps looking at Aram and not actually knowing that Rice's character is actually our protagonist. The rude cook then thinks that Rice might be a famous chef in real life, as he was able to make such a good dish with only basic ingredients. He then remembers what happened after he tried that chicken skewer dish and how he really enjoyed it. He then keeps on insisting for our protagonist to show him his secret recipe, but Aram just told him that there's nothing secret in the ingredients and it's just the way he made it that's important. But the blonde chef, whose in-game name now we learn is Korean Cuisine King, finds it unconvincing and keeps bothering our protagonist about it. Cuisine King also asks him how he got it to taste salty without salt, and Aram tells him that he just needed to look around because the game already offers everything. The food tasted salty because he used the salt bugs he found in the forest. After that continues for some time and Cuisine King becomes beyond annoying, Melina snaps and starts saying some harsh words to him about how he's bothering them too much and he's too stubborn and that he should just apologize and leave them be. But Cuisine King just found this cute, so he then asks her about adding her as a friend so that they can meet again. Is my bro a simp? So they have some bickering back and forth for a little while, and then Aram says that he's done with the cleaning and that he needs to go as he's got work to do the day after. They thank each other and they leave, leaving Cuisine King hanging there before he could add them to his friends. And now back to reality. The rude chef is trying to figure out where he really went wrong with them for them to leave him that abruptly. And in the meantime, a new customer shows up requesting bibimbap. And as the rude chef was a bit distraught, he orders our protagonist to make it himself. Lady Server was just annoyed by the rude chef, thinking to herself of what gives him a right to be this rude. We learned that this customer is not here accidentally, but is some big shot to whom this restaurant was recommended as a must-eat place for bibimbap, as he's on a tour trying to find the best bibimbap he can. The food is served and he tries it, not expecting much, but with the first taste of it, he realizes that this is the best bibimbap by far. Everything is so perfect. All of the ingredients are perfectly blended and the texture is so superb, and that blows his mind. As he just lived through an ecstasy eating our protagonist's food, he then calls the server over to compliment the food and ask if anything changed with the restaurant, as it definitely doesn't taste as it did before the first time he was here. The server quietly tells him that bibimbap was actually made by the assistant chef that recently joined them. The customer is not sure why would a person be able to make food this good work as a mere assistant chef. The customer now asks server Mira if he could have a short time with the assistant cook, as he wants to ask him some things. Mira agrees and calls our protagonist. The customer starts praising Aram's food, saying that he made the most delicious bibimbap he ever tried in his life, and then says that even though our protagonist might have good reasons to work here, he thinks his levels of skills are more fit for a proper chef, and gives him his business card and then leaves, telling him to call him if he needs any help. Aram is pretty surprised as he looks at that business card and sees that this guy is a restaurant owner himself of a restaurant called Jangmyeong. Seeing that our protagonist isn't in the kitchen, the rude chef then starts scolding our protagonist, telling him that he should never have left the kitchen without his permission. Aram says that he didn't do it for himself, but because the customer requested it, and Mira confirms this, but the rude chef is persistent for the things to go his way and keeps scolding him, throwing all kinds of threats. After a bit of time, Mira, fed up with unreasonable demands and criticism from the chef, gets a bit more involved in the argument and in a somewhat familiar way tells the rude chef that he crossed the line and that it's not Aram's fault at all. They keep on bickering like that for some time when our protagonist bows his head down really low and apologizes for getting out of the kitchen without first asking him. This feeds into the rude chef's ego, no, and he reluctantly accepts the apology. Now after some time, we see Aram walking back, thinking of what to buy for his next meal, which makes him remember that it doesn't really matter as he can't taste anything anyways. When he gets home, we see him being pretty depressed again, remembering how he had to abandon his dream and his work and how things haven't changed even with time. This negative feeling makes him want to play the game real again, and so he does exactly that. And when he enters the game, the smells that are absent in real life just come to him and he can feel everything. This game looks even better than the reality itself. He then decides to try his new skill out and starts climbing up the tree. He releases his hands, feeling more free and excited while climbing, and goes all the way up to the top of the palm tree. And there he can see this magnificent view of sunset with greenery all around him, looking and feeling better than anything he experienced before. This world really gives him a drive for life, and our protagonist wants to stay here forever. The next day, we see the store owner coming by and asking the main chef to make him some bibimbap, but the chef didn't feel like making it, saying all kinds of excuses. After seeing that there's no convincing the rude chef to make it for him, he then decides to ask our protagonist if he could make him one, to what Aram happily agrees. After all, he's their boss, which is a fact the rude chef keeps missing, it seems. And after trying the Aram's bibimbap and going through the epiphany of all those who tried it so far as well, he suggests the main chef to promote our protagonist to the sous chef, as he's doing really well and his food is amazing. The rude chef gets really annoyed by this and protests, saying that the boss made that decision based on only trying one dish. Then he goes to our protagonist to spill out his dissatisfaction with their boss's decision at him and starts reprimanding him for every little thing he could find odd about him. But it's not until the rude chef tells our protagonist that skills are not important for a chef to be a good chef that Aram calmly talks back to him and tells him that he's wrong, which really makes the rude chef infuriated, and so he then just levels up his insults and voice volume. Mira is doing her best to stop them from arguing, but the rude chef just lost his mind and he's just keeping at it. After saying what he wanted to say, Aram decides to quit the job, so then he takes off his apron and walks out of the shop, with Mira telling him to come back and the rude chef telling him that they don't need him. We see our protagonist now thinking to himself that even if he lost all his connections and his sense of smell, he won't give up his pride for cooking. And as he was now getting depressed over his decision, the guy that gave him the business card, Mr. Lim Young, shows up asking Aram if he's okay. And as our protagonist recognized him, Mr. Lim Young offers him to work at his restaurant as a real chef. We see the old Lim sitting next to our protagonist and they're talking about the beef Aram had with the rude chef, and in this case it's not literal beef like food beef, but the fight they had. He feels he had to defend his pride as the chef was just too much for him, but then that he's sorry for losing his job like that. The old man Lim recommends him to join his newly opened restaurant. He tells him that he was chasing after his dream, but only recently in his old age was he able to open a restaurant. He adds that the restaurant is pretty empty, which is why he went on to recruit more younger people with ideas and skills to make his restaurant more vibrant and an attractive place where people will have a good time. And seeing the genuine intentions behind Mr. Lim, our protagonist decides to reveal his disability and tells him that he doesn't have a sense of smell and that because of that it would be impossible for him to be working for Lim. Aram is already back to his depressed self as he thinks that nobody would give him a chance as a chef knowing this disability. But to his surprise, Mr. Lim just smiles considerately and says that that doesn't bother him and that he wants to conduct a proper official interview back at his restaurant. Our protagonist is moved by this and is really grateful that the excitement quickly overtakes his depression and he starts feeling like there is a chance for him to have a new beginning in life. A bit later, they arrive at the Lim's restaurant and Aram thinks it's amazing, looking old school, but at the same time luxurious. And he also lives really close to it, which is very convenient. When they get in, the old man Lim wants them to do an interview, so he starts right away asking questions, but our protagonist says that it's better if he just makes something based on what he can get evaluated. Mr. Lim agrees to it and tells him to make something of his choice. Once in the kitchen, Aaron spends a bit of time thinking on how he'll go about making this food that his shot at this job depends on, because he's limited with ingredients, and also, most importantly, his lack of smell doesn't make it any easier. After some time, Aaron finally made a dish, and the dish he made is called reddish bibim noodles, a traditional old school dish. Mr. Lim is happy with his choice and now tries it and is left speechless. And right at that moment, a guy casually walks in asking for food. Seeing Aram, he introduces himself quickly as Park Chulo, and then seeing Mr. Lim so occupied with food, decides to ask for a meal himself. Our protagonist brings him a serving of it, and Mr. Park is a bit suspicious as he knows this is an old school dish and only the older generation's people can make it well. But of course, as we came to expect it by now, the guy trying it goes through a surreal experience as the food he just ate is the best food he ever tried. It's a gourmet masterpiece that sends you to heaven and back. It's the experience that makes the old young for a moment. It's just that special. And seeing them feeling so satisfied and joyful, our protagonist innocently asks if he passed the interview and got hired. A little bit of time passed and our protagonist logged back into the game as we learned that he did actually get the job. But now it's time to enjoy the game again as we see Seekin approaching him and praising him for killing the Lizard Queen. Seekin then comments how it's funny how our protagonist started playing the game just to cook but actually became one of the stronger players, as Seekin asks Aram if he can be in his raid group. And as they are walking to the integrated server, Aram accepts Seekin's offer. We then get to see the map of the current area they're in, and we see the location of the integrated server. After reaching the outskirts of the integrated server and seeing beautiful green meadows and players grinding mobs in the distance, we learn that the integrated server is the area where the real game actually begins. So basically they were in the newbie zones up until now, and Seekin gets so excited for not being a newbie anymore since he managed to reach the integrated server. We learn more things about this place, the most important one being that mobs here aren't passive as they are in the newbie zones and will attack first as well. As two of them depart for now, and Aram sees Seeking singing a song, and Seeking explains how this song is a skill he has because his class is a minstrel. So I kinda knew what this word means, bros, but I had to Google it, and minstrel is basically a person who sang heroic songs for noblemen. Now, after Seeking leaves, Aram decides to visit a small town nearby. He sees players trading everywhere, blacksmiths making armors, potion shops and more, as he gets a weird and unsettling feeling about this village because he sees no kids here and only adults. Plus, there's not that many people in the village as well, which makes him wonder what might the reason for it be, but then he notices a restaurant and he forgets all about this and decides to enter it and to check what food they sell. However, he learns that this restaurant only sells bread and soup, and after trying it, he finds out that it isn't tasty at all. So, he decides to add some of the ingredients of his own, and after adding all the ingredients, he even gains some XP points for it as well. After trying to eat it again, he enjoys it now as he figures that it's been so long that he didn't taste toast due to his lack of taste in real life. The woman working in the restaurant approaches him asking if he's a cook, as Aram gets a new quest notification as the woman asks him to help with her restaurant. He decides to accept the quest in hopes it won't be a monster slaying quest like the one he got from the Spider Queen, and figures since she's asking for help with the restaurant, it should be that kind of a quest. The woman then starts eating the food Aram made suddenly as Aram yells how she must be hungry. Well, she denies it, saying she just wanted to try out his cooking, but Aram knows she's lying. She then asks what he thinks about their food, and he gets a dialogue bubble offering him to lie and say it's tasty, or be honest and say it sucks. He figures how being a chef calls for honesty in this situation when rating food, and this leaves the woman angry, but then she asks Aram to teach her how to cook delicious food. So he accepts the quest, and the woman makes soup and bread again, and Aram starts adding ingredients again so she can learn while watching him do it. And while he's doing it, a quest window pops up with more details about this quest as we learn that this woman's name is Rosaland. After offering her the food, he sees that her satisfaction bar didn't increase much, saying how she doesn't like the chicken, which surprises Aram as when she tried it for the first time, she said it was delicious. Now, after trying the bread with a facial expression as she's trying to eat a sock, leaving Aram worried, her satisfaction bar skyrockets as the quest now continues with Rosaland saying how their village was once vibrant and full of people until one day the sky got hellishly red and Devil Raiden sent down his pterodactyl looking monsters to abduct people with skills, leaving only those without any skills in the village, and even blasting the village with its huge hand. This intrigues Aram as he figures out how the lore of this game is actually interesting, with the devil basically stealing knowledge from humans, as the quest updates again, letting Aram know that he needs to cook Rosaland's recipe twice perfectly with the ingredients that are obtainable within the village and near the village. Now, after leaving the restaurant to find some useful ingredients, he sees some players trying to feed a cat, but the cat isn't eating anything they offer her, and as Aram approaches the cat, he sees the question mark above its head, meaning that there is a quest related to this cat, and he starts petting it and asks it if it's not eating the food given to her right now because the food isn't delicious, as the cat starts making cute faces, making everyone lose their mind over it. Then a new quest window pops up, letting Aram know how this cat wants to eat the royal jelly, which recipe is the reward for completing the previous restaurant quest, and as he tries to leave to go finish the first quest and then to obtain the recipe for the royal jelly, the cat touches his leg, making him really bad about leaving it for now. As he's roaming the town, he's hearing people trade again many different items, rare and common, and then suddenly he hears Aether's voice calling him, and Aram thanks him for the net he gave him because it helped him finish off the Lizard Queen, and this surprises Aether because the net is a basic item and this is a boss mob which is supposed to be done by a group, but Aram cleared it solo with just a basic item like that. Aram comments how he just got lucky as he offers Aether lizard leather he got from the Lizard Queen, as Aether is left shocked after seeing such a rare item. He then decides to craft Aram something out of it, as we see him getting completely consumed in this job with razor sharp focus as he's crafting this item. Aram admires his skills, thinking he resembles a machine now, as we see Aether completing the crafting process and making a leather jacket and some pants for Aram. Aram is so happy after seeing this and asking how much does he need to pay Aether, but Aether says how it's fine, since if it wasn't for Aram in the first place, he would never got the opportunity to craft something from a rare material as the Lizard Queen's hide and improve his crafting skill with it. Now we see some random players trying to catch a spotted pig, but it's the biggest one in the field and it just overpowers them, as a bit later Aram approaches it, uses his weak point skill and turns this pig into mincemeat with a single blow. He then notices players that were fighting the pig earlier, one surviving but the other one actually dying to the pig, as the surviving player lets Aram know how he'll skin the pig and Aram can keep the meat, as if Aram isn't the one who just finished the pig off, but being a good and naive guy as he usually is, he agrees to it and decides to make samgyeopsal from this pig, as we learn that this was his favorite food before losing his sense of taste. And we also learned that all these Korean food names sound like jokes to me and not actual food name bros, but anyways, Aram decides to prepare the meal right here in the open, leaving these other players surprised after hearing this. After using his chef skill, discerning eye on the pig, he finds out details about this pig, learning that the fresh quality of the meat is of the highest level. He remembers his life before, losing his sense of taste, and how he spent times with his friends eating samgyeopsal on rooftops as they would celebrate and have parties often. He also figures out how he completely forgot how his favorite food tastes like and decides to remember its taste through this game. He borrows the sword from this other player so he can use it to cut up the pig. As he starts chopping it up, he figures out how some small details on the pig aren't replicated from real life, probably because this is a game. And as he continues to chop it up, this other player is first left surprised at how skillful he's doing it, but then he thinks how the way Aram is cutting it looks oddly familiar. Now, after finishing the cutting process, Aram turns around and sees a shield, which he decides to use as a barbecue grill and starts placing pork chops on it, admiring the visuals of it and even the smell. The smell attracts many players around him now as we see the final product. Other players ask if they can have some too. Aram decides to go in for a bite in hopes he'll remember the taste of samgyeopsal. And I know I'm butchering this name as Aram just butchered this pig, but anyways, after trying the taste of it, he is left in the state of absolute bliss as his memories of its taste come back and he remembers why it was his favorite food to begin with. The other player that was with him decides to eat it the same way Aram is doing it, and after taking a first bite, his face suddenly turns into that Maui based emoji and he starts crying at how delicious this tastes. Now Aram gets invigorated, thinking how he has to hunt more pigs like this and create this food again to present it to the lady in that restaurant and finally complete the quest. He starts chasing the pigs excitedly with other players admiring him, as you see that lady from earlier chapters observing him in what seems to be some kind of an admin room. We hear other voices of people talking as well about random things like what to do after work and dating, stuff I don't know much about. Anyways, as this blonde lady seems to get irritated at either hearing these talks or looking at Aram playing the game and absolutely enjoying it, she turns around and tells everyone how today they'll have team dinner and they will go to have some samgyeopsal. And we learn that this blonde girl is the team leader of the mods here. Now we go back to Aram sitting in a field of slaughtered pigs around him as we learn that he's made samgyeopsal almost 400 times already, thinking how he can do it even if blind. Now, after actually doing it for 400 times, he gets an achievement which gives him a butcher skill rank F. He decides to carry this and complete the quest, but before doing so, actually decides to add more ingredients to it as he remembered that it needs to be of perfect quality for quest completion. As he's looking at the meat he wants to carry back, he realizes he needs to add more salt, but how in this area there aren't any salt bugs, as he remembers that because his class is a chef, he has a special ability called the Chef's Blessing, as he decides to use it on this food now, and the magic starts appearing from his hands, and he says how he needs this food to be more salty, and the magic gets so bright and suddenly goes out, and after it goes out, he's left surprised for literally receiving 2 bottles of salt in his hands. Now bros, imagine you playing a class in a game where your racial skill or like class special skill is to create a bottle of salt. Truly amazing fun. Now, after adding salt and finishing this one meal, he feels tired after cooking for so long and decides to go around to find some vegetables. After a bit of time, we see him carrying carrots and cucumbers and thinking of what food he can make with them, as he decides to go and try to find bees so he can get honey from them, which he will use to craft that royal jelly after receiving its recipe as a reward from the restaurant quest. After a bit of searching, he finds the killer bee as it suddenly attacks him, making him figure out how it's definitely more aggressive than the monsters he encountered in the newbie zone. The bee goes for another attack and Aram uses his weak point skill on it, but the bee is just too fast and he barely dodges its attack. As it goes for another attack, Aram, now a little bit used to its speed, uses a focus tip and manages to kill the killer bee. How ironic, he kills the killer bee and he receives a small amount of honey dropping from it. Suddenly a swarm of these bees appear in the sky and start attacking him, and he uses his weak point ability on all of them and then his focus tip ability, chaining it on all the bees at once, taking them all down in a single attack. Now, some time passes, and after he's finished hunting, he decides to taste this honey, and after going for a single lick and seeing how good it tastes, he finally understands the deep psychology of bears and why they like honey. He figures out how even though he spends some time hunting, he needs to find a beehive to obtain more honey, or else he'd have to hunt these bees forever because of how small of the amount of honey they drop. We then get a shot of some random players being paralyzed as they are staring at a giant monster killer bee boss, as Aaron gets close to them as well and is left surprised after seeing it too. Now we go back to the paralyzed players as they are left completely scared after remembering that 30% of the damage you take in this game is replicated in real life as well. We see the bee attacking them, and some of them manage to escape while the bee catches the last guy, piercing him with its giant sting. As the guy is falling almost dead to the floor, his last words were, "Don't pick up the items that I've dropped." Truly poetic. As the killer bee keeps attacking these players, we see Aram running in the distance towards them and attacking the bee himself. He figures if he defeats this monster, the rest of the hive will come as well, and he'll be able to loot royal jelly easily then. He uses his focus tip on it again, but to no avail, as the bee counterattacks him with multiple stings. Aram then focuses up, using his weak point skill again and finding the spot on the bee, and then using his focus tip ability. A huge explosion happens, after which we see the bee dying and Aram receiving loot from it. One of the items dropped was the royal jelly he was trying to find, and as he's happily inspecting this honey, one of the players that was fighting the bee earlier approaches him and praises Aram for his skills of killing this bee and promises to be his faithful dog. However, Aram declines and decides to leave. He then stumbles upon a huge tree that he saw for the first time in his life and decides to climb up on it to explore it, thinking that there may be some special fruit at the top. We see him climbing on it using his lizard wall walking ability, and after reaching the top, instead of fruits, he finds a nest with some special eggs in it. He inspects the eggs and we learn that it's from a creature named Mayonnaise, as this surprises him and he admires the game for so many unique and interesting things in it, like finding mayonnaise like the one you use in cooking from the eggs. We then go back to the village and see that cat from earlier almost fainting out of hunger, as we see Aram approaching in the distance, carrying the royal jelly in his hand to give it to this cat. After the cat saw the royal jelly, it got so happy, as we see Aram kneeling down to give it the royal jelly so that it can eat it. After the cat eats the royal honey jelly, the notification lets Aram know how he completed the quest, and as a reward, he got this cat as his pet, letting him know that this cat also knows many secrets. The cat slowly climbs upon his sleeve as he lifts it up and decides to give it a name, and gives it the most unique cat name ever. Try to guess it, bros. 1, 2, 3. 3, 2, 1. You have 3 seconds. The name is Meow. Wow. So unique. Now anyway, cat stat window pops up as we see its health bar, affection and some other details. After Aram leaves, other players are left confused as they didn't know that this game has the pet system like this, as we see the admin blonde girl from earlier approaching them, letting them know that in this game, if you complete special quests, you can unlock pets, as the players comment how they thought the only way to obtain the pets in this game is to buy them through the in-game cash shop. Now we see Aram happily walking through the city with his new pet cat, as the woman keeps explaining to those players how indeed you can buy pets through the in-game cash shop, but how it's also really important to try and go against the rules of the game to discover new and unique ways for it to be played. She encourages players to think outside the box, as this will make the game way more fun and enjoyable for them. The players then start talking about all the different activities they might try doing in this game besides regular leveling through... Why is it so hard to pronounce this? Besides regular leveling through hunting. Try to say this fast, bros. Anyways, besides regular leveling through hunting, as we see this blonde girl checking her admin screen and looking at Aram and his cat having fun, which makes her happy as well. She starts teleporting back to her admin room and thinks how she'd like to know more about Aram. Now we see Aram returning to the restaurant to complete the quest, as you see the lady working there starting to apologize because she still didn't wash the dishes from the last time he was here, as he thinks how this game is too realistic sometimes. He then puts all the ingredients he had gathered on the table in front of him as he gets ready to cook, with the lady owner of the restaurant helping him cook as well. As we see him preparing one meal, he asks Rosalind if she's flipping the meat on the grill, but she says there's no need to worry about it, as she can do at least that. After finishing the first part of the meal, he focuses on the second one, and after finishing preparing all the food, he serves it on the table, as we see all the food he just cooked is of perfect level quality. After teaching her how to prepare delicious food yet again, we learn that this quest that he just completed now had a huge influence on this small village, as it started regaining people with useful skills that they didn't have because the devil abducted them. Aram also receives a recipe for royal jelly and unlocks a hidden achievement too, which lets him know how by doing these recent actions he earned interest from the culinary lord Michelin. Oh, I get it, the reference. It's like the Michelin stars that those luxurious hotels have in real life, bros. Now, we see a huge lizard monster fighting with a mysterious player, as his player gets a notification letting him know how Rice, which is Aram's in-game name, how Rice has recently hunted down the lizard princess, as this player wonders who this Rice guy is. We see this player eating the lizard raw, as the notification lets him know that he only gained 1%, only 1% of the benefits he'd get if this meat was properly cooked. And as the scene zooms out, we see this man covered in lizard's blood after eating the lizard raw, commenting how he needs to find a cook in this game because cooking for him personally is bothersome, as the notification lets us know that the name and the level of this player are a mystery, but that his profession is a gourmet, which is kinda funny because he's just eating lizards